My sister-in-law, Leah, handed me the card. Dan and I were visiting her a couple of weeks ago. Leah became very dear to me years ago when Daniel and I were riding our bicycles around in her neighborhood in Buffalo Grove, and we would stop there, actually before we rode. And I always look forward to those stops because Leah always had Cocoa Puffs on hand. And whenever I would sit down at her kitchen table, she would offer me a large bowl of Cocoa Puffs and milk. And I thought that was the very best thing to eat before riding my bicycle. Daniel told me later that Leah had said to him after our very first visit that she thought I was a sensitive person. We connected right away. Leah found out a few weeks ago that she has cancer. Dan and I visited her last week, and we had a meal with her. We brought in lunch, and Dan had to go back to work after a short time, so I stayed on, and I talked to Leah for a while. And that is when she handed me the card. And inside that card were the names of all the people in her sisterhood in the temple. And all of these people that had been so dear to her for so many years are now sending her meals every week. And when I looked at those names and I looked up into Leah's face, I thought, wow, this gift shines like the sun. Because when we are stripped bare in our lives of the things that we always assumed that we had, in a journey like cancer, for example, a gift like that is life itself. Well, today we're going to hear a story of a woman who gave a magnificent gift, and it's in our gospel today in Luke 20. But today I'm not reading the story. Members of our intermediate Sunday school class are going to help me with my sermon today. So listen with me to the story of the widow who gave her last 2 pennies.
Jesus turned to his disciples, speaking loudly enough for the others to hear.
Beware of the religious scholars. They like to parade around in long robes. They love being greeted in the marketplaces. They love taking the best seats in the synagogue.
They adore being seated around the head table after banquets.
But in their greed, they rob widows of their houses and cover up their greed with long, pretentious prayers. Their condemnation will be all the worse because of their hypocrisy.
And then Jesus turned his attention from the religious scholars to some wealthy people who were depositing their donations in the offering boxes. A widow, obviously poor, came up and dropped 2 copper coins into one of the boxes.
I am telling you the truth. This poor widow has made a bigger contribution than all of those rich fellows. She is giving all she has to give.
I have a large file box at home that I keep things in. And in that box are many, many cards that were sent to me before I went to seminary, because leaving the city of Chicago was a very big move for me, and I needed a lot of support. And I saved all of those cards, and along with them, I've saved birthday cards that I received from my mother and my father through the years, and I've also saved letters that I have received at very difficult times in my life that have molded me. Oh, now, why would I keep such things as this? Of what use are they? I've put them aside. I've made them holy. The word is sanctified in in theology. I've sanctified these special things, these pieces of paper and the ink that is written on them, because they define my life. They are special to me because they say something about who I am. And I would be bereft if they were taken from me. I would know I had lost something extremely dear. Well, our widow today that we were just introduced to was the very definition of bereft in her day. Widows in Jesus' day were destitute. They had nothing to live on. After their husbands died, they had no estate, and they did not get any support from the Roman government either, so they were very, very poor. Jesus was very aware of widows and their state, and so he happened to notice this widow that day. Now, you know, most of these little people that are in our lives, or that were in Jesus' life, in Jesus' day, aren't really noticed that much. I have a dear friend who told me that as he grew older, he noticed that people didn't notice him. He might be standing in a line up to a counter to buy some food or something in the store, and all the other people that were maybe bigger and younger and maybe had bigger voices, they would go and no one would even look at him and ask him, "Can I help you?" And he was shocked by that and realized that as he grew older, he was more and more each day becoming invisible in the eyes of the world. Well, this widow, she was invisible too. But there were other people in this story that Jesus told that were not invisible. There were the scribes. Our little widow is framed on both sides with scribes in this story. And scribes had long robes like these, except they were much fancier. They had long robes, and they could parade around in the temple, and everybody would bow or say something to them because they were very special holy people. And they also would recite these long, long prayers and get people's attention by doing that as well. These scribes were very visible in the eyes of the world, as opposed to the widow who was not. The widow had 2 cents to give that day. Now, nobody knew about that, but that's how much she had. And so, when Jesus was teaching his disciples, he was right in the middle of trying to describe to them that these scribes who were walking around in their long robes, he said, beware of those scribes. He said, beware of them, which I would have never been thinking, I should beware of a person with a stole and a robe on. But Jesus said, those very people, they devour widows' homes. You know, when I first read this passage years ago, and that word devour just jumped out of the page at me, I decided I had to look it up because I couldn't believe that anything that powerful would be in a story like this, but indeed it was. The thing that Jesus was saying is the kind of thing that when I hear the word, I think about a predatory animal who's chased down its food and its prey and is now devouring it to fill its stomach. This is the word that Jesus used to describe those holy people, those scribes. He said they devour widows' houses. And the way it happened was when a man died, the estate of that family would actually go to the temple. The temple would inherit the estates of all the people that were, part of the temple population. And so that meant that the people, like the scribes that had the long robes, these people had to manage the estates of widows. They were the guardian of the estate of the widows. And they did not turn the money back over to the widows. They used it all up for themselves. And they left the widows walking the streets, destitute. And that is why Jesus said, beware. They aren't what they seem. Well, Jesus also pointed out another group of people that weren't quite what they seemed. He pointed to some rich people that were coming along. The cans were sort of a trumpet-shaped metal. So the sound you just heard of the 2 pennies going into the can was a very similar sound that people would hear when someone would deposit money in the temple treasury. And so there were people who were wealthy who would come up, and they would put a large amount of coins into that trumpet-shaped can. And everybody knew, of course, they gave a lot, But Jesus said to his disciples, he said, yes, they're very generous, and they've given a lot, but, they have a lot. And they probably have given enough that they can manage it, but not more than would make them feel like they might have to change their life because of the size of their gift. In other words, their gift was not a sacrificial gift. It was something that was on a long list of priorities that they had to spend their money on. And they might not even miss what they gave that much when they went home. That's when the widow showed up. Now, even though she was invisible to everybody else, Jesus, before she even put her 2 cents into the treasury, Jesus pointed her out right away to his disciples. He says, look, I want you to look at her. And then they watched as she went up and she deposited her gift. And then she literally disappeared. Jesus said, this woman has given all she had, everything that she had to live on. And she did it without anybody noticing. Or probably she thought no one noticed, because she sort of disappeared into the mist. But Jesus noticed, and because he pointed her out, his disciples noticed, and guess what? We notice, because we're still reading about it today. It was a tiny little gift, but it was mighty. It was a big gift in the eyes of God, and it was all that she had. She gave it that day. That widow is a giant in my eyes. I have asked myself on some occasions, as I was studying the scripture again this year, I asked myself, could I do that? Could I do that? Yes, I give. I do. I'm generous. I give more than many people give, I suspect. And I've given my life to ministry. Yes, that's true too. But the question is, could I take my bank book, my IRA, my deed to my house, and everything I own, and put it in the temple treasury and walk away with nothing? Could I do that? No. No. But I did realize that I might be able to do that someday if I allowed myself to completely trust God. Because if I was completely trusting God, then I would be waking up each morning and waiting for God to provide for my needs. And I would be surprised at the end of each day that, yes, God provided everything I needed that day. And then I would wake up the next morning and the same would happen. It's like being free. It's like tasting that wonderful taste of freedom and feeling that cool, gentle breeze across your face and realizing, I don't have to carry around all these things that I hold on to because I'm not sure that I might need them someday. I can just leave this here, go on without nothing but myself, and let God take care of me. So I know it is possible. But for now, it's baby steps for me. I take baby steps on this. And I actually invite you to take a baby step. I invite you to sometime in your life, doesn't have to be today, it could be any day, I invite you to give a sacrificial gift. Now, a sacrificial gift is a gift that you give that cuts in to what you have and makes you have to change your life. It's the kind of gift that you will notice every day because you've given it and you can't do something else. When we were doing the radon repairs a few years ago, I went up to Pastor Malagon. He's the pastor who leads the congregation, the Hispanic congregation that also uses our building. And so I said to him, Pastor Malagon, this radon renovation was so expensive to us. Is there some way that your congregation could support it, even in a small way? And he just looked at me and smiled. And he said, I will ask my congregation to give a sacrificial gift. And I knew what that meant. I knew that meant that they were going to give more than they thought they would ever give, and pay maybe even more than they were comfortable with, so we could all enjoy this building without radon circulating around in the air. When the widow gave all she had, she did it because she trusted God. And her gift speaks to us even today. Her gift asks us if we too could trust God as she did. Because every gift that we give is holy. And not only the gifts that we give, but we too, when we give the way God gives to us, we too are made holy. And I pray that as we learn to give, and giving is something that we learn throughout our whole life, that we might come more and more to be able to trust the God who has always loved us, to trust that God to provide for us and to love us to the end. Thanks be to God.